if we can, let's talk about the buildup to the war.
All right.
What were the key states on both sides that were debating? What are the ones that were certainly going to be firmly on one side or the other? And maybe what are the ones that were critical at the borderline?
The states that were in the forefront of the secession movement were the Deep South states, and South Carolina was kind of ground central for what was going on there. It just so happened that the Democrats had their national convention in Charleston in 1860, which is the worst place in the world they could have had it if they wanted a quiet, rational discussion of anything.
Yeah.
South Carolina is the first state to secede and then is quickly followed. You can just go the tier across Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Texas. It's 7 states. The deep South states go out in that initial, but there's a long period then, and they gather in Montgomery, Alabama to establish a new government with Montgomery as the capital of the Confederacy. Delegates from those states do. And they set up a provisional government that's going to last a year and call for the first national elections in 1861. There are only 7 states there, and really only 6 for a lot of it because Texas got there late. It was the last of the first 7 to secede. But the states that haven't seceded yet are the ones with the most people. Virginia, which is the most populous, North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri. 8 states have not gone out. 8 slaveholding states have not gone out. The most important one is Virginia among those that have not gone out. The question is, can they find some resolution to all of this, or is it going to get more serious, and are those states going to go? And it came to focus once again on Charleston, South Carolina, and a federal installation in Charleston Harbor, Fort Sumter. Much United States property and installations had been just given over to the Confederates. And the question is, can we do it with this one as well? This is a very difficult decision to make. And it comes down to what's going to happen in Charleston Harbor. And in the end, I mean, Jefferson Davis believed that he couldn't allow it to remain a federal installation because it's actually in the Confederacy from their point of view. And Lincoln, who's not conceding the right of states to secede, they're temporarily out of our power, but we have to maintain. He decided in the end to maintain power there, not to reinforce it, but to resupply it, needed supplies. And that's what triggers it. Then the ball's in Jefferson Davis's court. Okay, they're going to resupply it. What do we do? And they decided we need to insist that it surrender. And if it won't surrender, we need to fire on it. And the Confederates fired the first shots. They would have said we were forced to fire the first shots by what Lincoln did. Nobody wanted to be the ones who fired the first shots. But in the end, it's the Confederates who fired the first shots. And once that is fired, the key thing is not the firing on Sumter in the end, but that sets up the key thing, which is Lincoln's call for volunteers to suppress the rebellion. And he is going to ask each state to supply people. And the upper South states, most of them have said, we're not going to secede, but you can't, but the states that are gone had the right to secede, and you can't do anything to make them come back. Lincoln is seeming to make them do things to come back. And so 4 more states went out. Virginia went out. Arkansas went out. Tennessee went out. Then North Carolina went out. And now you have an 11-state confederacy rather than 7. But more than that, you have Virginia. The city of Richmond has 40% of all the industrial capacity in the entire Confederacy, what became the Confederacy. Virginia is the most populous state, has the largest slave population, the largest white population. It supplies the most important military leaders, and the capital ends up in Richmond. They move from Montgomery to Richmond in acknowledgement of how important Richmond is, that this is the key state. The key states that didn't go out were Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. Delaware didn't either, but who cares? The other 3 didn't go out, and that really mattered because they were more populous. But 11 are gone, 4 remain in the Union.
And to lay out some more context, going to Perplexity here, by total enslaved population on the eve of the Civil War, we have, looking at the top 5 states, Virginia, as you said, with the most number of slaves, 490,000. And Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, all with over 400,000 slaves.
And Mississippi and South Carolina have the highest proportion of enslaved people of any of the states. And this is an interesting little fact from the 1860 census. When you're talking about white people in the United States, those are the two wealthiest states per capita in the United States, are South Carolina and Mississippi in 1860.
Boy, the complicated history of this great nation of ours.
It's hard to overstate the resources. The states that sent the most men into the Confederate Army are Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Georgia. 3 of those come in this second wave of secessions. 3 of them, 3 of the 4. Only Georgia among the original ones was in those top 4 states. So you would have had a much, much smaller pool of manpower for that earlier version of the Confederacy. It's inconceivable to me that you would have had the war we had with just that version.
So it does feel, just to linger on it, like there was a lot on the balance here. Like there was a lot of different decisions that could have been made, even on the political side, that could have turned the tides.
For example, there's a secession convention in Virginia. It votes twice against secession. Twice. It's only after Sumter that they come back for another vote. I mean, it's a unionist vote in that convention in Virginia. And it's only after Fort Sumter.
Wow.
And then it's still so divided that a big chunk of Virginia decide that's how you get West Virginia. West Virginia essentially secedes from Virginia in the course of the Civil War.
And given the industrial capacity of Virginia, that was a critical state. So it could have been, Virginia could have changed. We could have avoided the Civil War with Virginia alone.
It would have really changed. I mean, Virginia is the key. Virginia is the key because of the manpower, the industrial capacity, the food production, and Virginia gives you Lee, Jackson, Jeb Stuart. I mean, and the most soldiers of any state in the Confederacy. It's a real game changer to get Virginia. Plus, it also gives you these unbelievable ties to the revolutionary generation. Hey, it's Georgia's home state. It is now in the Confederacy with his big statue on the Capitol grounds of George Washington. Because you get Washington, the ties to Jefferson, the ties to Madison. All of this comes in with Virginia.
So I think a lot of historians have said that the Civil War was inevitable. You're really painting a picture here where it perhaps was not inevitable.
I don't think it's inevitable. Things happen in a sequence. I was at a academic conference once when they were trying to decide what important dates were, and they concluded that no dates are an artificial construction. No date is more important than any other.
Yeah.
That is so obviously preposterous. I mean, things happen in a sequence. They don't just sort of happen. Lincoln's elected, then South Carolina secedes, then other states secede. Then, I mean, things happen as a consequence of what happened before, and you have these various things that have to happen before the next thing does. And then we end up with a war that seems to be inevitable, but it's not. It's just the way things played out. All of these factors are in motion, and you end up with the sequence that gets you to where people start shooting each other.
Yeah, when you read history and look back, it seems inevitable. But if we were to place ourselves in that moment of time, do you think there's decisions that could have been made?
The decision to not let Fort Sumter, I mean, that's a big decision to make. If Lincoln had just said, go ahead and take Fort Sumter, okay, then what would it have taken to trigger the departure of those upper South states? That would have changed that whole equation. But Lincoln decided you just can't keep giving them everything that they want if you don't concede that they have the right to do what they did.
Yeah, there would be a continued heated political debates, intense political debates about the expansion of slavery, but it would not cause rebellion to then escalate into a full-on hot war.
I think that's conceivable. I don't think the war was inevitable. But I think the conditions were present for it to happen. Obviously, I mean, that's stating because it did happen. But I think it's very tricky to just say that it was inevitable. That's kind of starting at the end of the story and just saying, let's look at the factors that got us here. We know it was going to happen, and these are the things that pointed this direction.
Can we just actually linger on this, on the nature of war? Over 700,000 people dead. How do we make sense of our capacity as, in that context, Americans, to kill sometimes literally our brothers.
Yes, sometimes literally our brothers.
How is that even possible?
Well, one thing, it tells me things are pretty important to people on both sides if you're going to continue for a war that long. I mean, there was a period in the literature, in the scholarly literature, in the 1980s and into the 1990s where they argued that the Confederacy wasn't a nation, and the proof was that they didn't try very hard, that if they'd really thought of themselves as a nation, they would have tried harder and fought longer. Well, they lost between 4.5% and 5.5% of their entire population, which is more than Great Britain, France, Germany, or Russia during World War I. They had a higher percentage loss than any of the powers in World War I. The U.S. lost about 1.8% of its population from the war. U.S. in World War II, 0.3% of its population. That seems they lost more than 30% of their entire white military-age males in the war. It'd be the equivalent of about 18 million Americans being killed now in a war. That seems to me that they're pretty serious about something there.
It means that's one of the largest percentages of loss. If that's a measure of dedication.
If that's your measure of dedication, yes. And it seems to me that it should be one of the metrics that you bring to play, they just keep at it. They didn't give up easily.
What can we say about the motivation? On the psychological side, did the members of the Confederacy hate the members of the Union?
Well, that escalated on both sides during the war. As more and more loss came, there was more hatred directed toward the enemy, more and more. This notion that they're all brothers and not really mad at each other, and that just doesn't hold up. There are places where the soldiers fraternized with one another and traded tobacco for coffee and that kind of stuff. But no, the bitterness as the war went on, and there was greater loss on the home front, and as the war became more all-encompassing and really went after the civilian side of the Confederacy was not shielded from it, the bitterness increased and increased and increased. And there's a lot of unhappiness with the war behind the lines in the Confederacy, absolutely. Unhappiness with the government. There's desertion. About 15% of Confederate soldiers deserted. About 12% of United States soldiers deserted. So there's desertion on both sides. There's war weariness. But the war goes on because I think if you had been able to poll most white Southerners even late in the war and say, okay, here are your choices. You either have Jefferson Davis in the government and the war goes on, or you're going back into the United States and the Lincoln government will be in charge and you won't have slavery. Which one do you pick? They're going to pick the first one. And that's why the war went on as long as it did.
But at the same time, to fast forward, and that maybe teaches you something about the nature of war, but after the war, maybe some of the decisions that Grant made, people were able to rediscover the brotherhood.
You mean at Appomattox you're talking about, the terms at Appomattox. Yes. And he didn't just reach up in the air and say, I've got some terms. Lincoln very specifically, he met with Lincoln shortly before Appomattox. Sherman was there. One top naval officer was there, Grant and Lincoln said, this is what I want. This is the kind of peace I want. Yeah. The whole point of this war is to put the nation back together. And a good start on that is, I mean, if it's just a rebellion, what do you do with traitors and rebels? You hang them. You don't bring them back. You don't treat them as prisoners of war, which the United States did during this. But the goal is to put the nation back together, and Lincoln said this is a good start. Make them sign a parole, make them accept the end of slavery and the fact that they're back in the Union. If they do that, they get to go home and resume their lives. It hadn't been decided yet whether they'll get to vote, but let them go home. Don't imprison them. Don't execute them. Don't execute their leaders. That's the decision.
From the perspective of the Union, what do you think about that kind of forgiveness?
Well, I think that it was sort of a nod toward the direction of forgiveness, but I don't think real forgiveness was there. There was still extremely hard feelings on both sides, and Lincoln's assassination upped the ante on that, especially for a while in the United States. The forgiveness. Two things in terms of the aftermath of the war, two words that often come into play are reunion and reconciliation. Those are two other things that are often conflated. Reunion is literally putting the nation back together. That happened. True reconciliation, that's much, much, much tougher. And that didn't come anytime soon on the part of millions of people on both sides, I think.
and we'll probably maybe talk about in multiple ways how maybe that is something that's still going on.
Oh, there are echoes of the Civil War all over the place. It's not still being fought, but you can see resonances of the Civil War because it's such a profoundly disruptive event that gets right at the heart of what the republic means. I mean, and so there's nothing else like it in U.S. history, and it's a great moment of truth. The residual aftermath and effects of which lingered for decades and are still present in some ways, I think.
So in 1859, most Americans were just living their life. Did they have a sense what was on the horizon?
It's what I like to call the Appomattox syndrome, which starts at the end of the story
Yep.
and says, of course, there was going to be a war because the war was inevitable. And of course, the United States was going to win and slavery was going to be destroyed because they were. So let's find out how we got right here.
Mm-hmm.
But no, most people didn't wake up in Iowa in 1857 and their first thought was, boy, I hate the South.
Mm-hmm.
Those slaveholders, no, people got on with their quotidian lives and they got to the farm or they went to their business and they weren't, nobody knew that they were living in the antebellum era, and that those great antebellum years were about to come to an end.
Mm-hmm.
That is something that it's hard to get people not to just put it out of your mind that that's all anybody is thinking about. They're thinking there's a lot of other stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big gold rush in Colorado. More people go to Colorado than went to California for a while. And you have these tremendous changes coming about, technological changes of the 1850s, where you have the real expansion of railroads, the real expansion of the telegraph. There's a shrinking of time and space that's remarkable for people at the time. It seemed dizzying to them at the time. There are a lot of things to think about other than how much I hate Yankees if I'm in South Carolina or I hate slaveholders if I live in New Hampshire. But periodically, there are these events that pop up that refocus on the differences between the sections. And you have the Kansas-Nebraska Act, you have Dred Scott, you have the caning of Charles Sumner on the floor of the Senate, you have Uncle Tom's Cabin earlier in the decade in and the impact that had on attitudes towards slavery. It doesn't create a bunch of abolitionists, but it creates a bunch of people who rethink their thoughts about slavery.
Sorry to ask the big question about history, but we're living today, 2026, and there's the sense that every day you wake up, the possibilities before us are endless, for the good, for the bad, for the truly destructive. There's a eerie sense that the possibility of a world war in different kinds of ways, whether it's sparked in the Middle East, or sparked in China and Taiwan, or sparked in Ukraine, Russia, or elsewhere totally surprising in the world, may be related to nuclear weapons or not. There's a sense that everything is possible. And of course, when history is written about the 21st century, it will all be obvious.
It's always obvious in retrospect. That's right.
What can we learn from the Civil War about how history unfolds itself, I suppose, for the modern day?
Well, I think that the potential threats now are different from the potential threats in the mid-19th century. The nuclear dimension, some kind of really brutal use of pathogens. I mean, there are lots of things that could happen now that couldn't happen then, at least not because humans were making them happen. But I mean, to me, one of the things to take away from the Civil War is really the resiliency of this republic, which I still think it's a resilient republic. We're living in a sort of wacky time,
Mm-hmm.
but I believe that I think that I have a great faith in the resiliency of the nation. I really do, of the United States. I think it's been through much tougher times than we're in now, and I think that we will weather this. Although everybody will have some scar tissue. There might even come a time when our leadership class actually leads, and which would be interesting. And I'm talking about both sides of the fence here. But that to me This is the supreme test of a republic that had been put in place in the late 18th century. Can that late 18th century republic adjust, including adjusting to deal with the profoundly disruptive issue of slavery in a way that allows it to go forward? And the answer is yes. In a war that brings slaughter on an unimaginable scale and brings social disruption in the former slaveholding states on an unimaginable, it just couldn't be more profoundly disruptive if you're a Confederate. There's not slavery anymore, and we lost the war, and a third of our military-aged white men are dead. Wow, that's a bad 4 years for our team. What's going to happen here? The Republic emerged from that and worked it out, and I think it goes back to me, the intelligence of the founding generation that put in place documents that actually allowed the Republic to deal with something like this.
Mhm.
And it's sort of a miracle to me that from a nation that was as prejudiced, racially prejudiced as the United States was, you get the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments out of this. It's just kind of mind-boggling that happens.
Yeah, I think resilience and adaptive innovation often looks like chaos in the moment.
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. But then when you really get to the end of that story, you look and there you are. And oh, it's okay. The nation is still intact.
Yeah.
And the 13th Amendment is in place. Wow, we didn't think that was
Uh-huh.
going to happen in 1861
Yeah.
when secession started. I mean, it really another lesson is that you cannot control what a great military event can set loose. I
Mhm.
mean, no things that nobody imagined would happen, including expansion of central power in ways that no one would have imagined. You don't get to ratchet that back and say, well, that'll never happen again. No, you know what? It happened, and maybe it will happen again because we've seen it happen. Nobody imagined that. The federal budget in 1860 was $63 million. That was the entire federal budget. The federal budget in 1865 was $1.2 billion. And if you throw in the Confederate side of that, it gets you over $2 billion, which means federal expenditures in 1860 would have lasted about 11 days in 1865. Nobody foresaw that. No, absolutely nobody foresaw that. And education legislation that would create the great land grant colleges and universities in no, it's the war brought a lot.
And I think most of the things that has happened through the hard periods of our country's history, nobody could have really foreseen, and then we somehow figure it out. And that gives me a lot of hope that
We
this kind of like extreme division, the arguments, the people basically speaking in the harshest of ways against each other, that is like the engine of brainstorming and figuring problems out that in the long arc of history create progress. But in the short term, it feels like a dumpster fire.
It does. And to me, the arc of US history has been, and Lincoln talked about this too, it's an expansion of freedoms and liberties. That's the long arc with very problematical places along the way. But again, the documents allow for that and the process allows for that. And I think that's one of the remarkable things about Philadelphia in the summer of 1787. I mean, those guys, a lot of whom owned slaves, put together something that's proved to be resilient and adaptable and changeable, and it has evolved in a way that is in the right direction, although there are always problems.
I love this country. I will never stop saying how much I love this country. It's an incredible experiment. We're this year celebrating 250th birthday. I can't wait for the next 250 years. This is such a fascinating study of human civilization.
And it is complicated. What we want now is a sort of cartoon version of what we Americans, as you watch popular culture, we want a 30-second view of whatever. Well, who should I like? Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? I want a 30-second version of the Civil War. History is not that way.
Mhm.
I've spent my whole life studying history, and maybe the main thing I've learned is however complicated I thought something was, when I really started to explore it, it's more complicated than I thought it was. People aren't simple, they're complicated. And you have to at least appreciate, you don't have to embrace the complexity. I guess you can't make people do that, but you have to at least concede that things are real. There's not a 20-second version of anything in the past. The past is complicated because humanoids are involved in it. They're complicated.
Yeah, when you look at the system as a whole, but as individual humans, we like to do the black and white thing where
Of
we just
course,
see the good, everything is good and evil, and then
because it's
we bicker,
easier.
and then we get together at Thanksgiving dinner and we yell at each other, and then people lose their shit and they stop talking to each other for a year, and then they make up and all this. This is just how humans interact with each other, but as a system, especially with the increasing levels of freedom, with the freedoms of speech, and be able to speak out about your feelings, even when they're intense feelings, that somehow works as a system.
And it's very messy.
Yeah.
The more freedom, the messier it is. Really, the messier it is.
And your job as a historian is a difficult job. And as you said, because the more you learn, the more you come to understand, the more complicated the picture appears.
Yep. And the more you learn, the more you learn that you don't know as much as you thought you did.
So some humility, it will take you a long way.
Yes, you want more of Grant than McClellan on that humility score. Grant would score high on humility. McClellan, every day, the first thought was, what about me? Who is going to not appreciate how wonderful I am today, thought George B. McClellan. That's the thought that nagged at him. Somebody might not know how great I am. That's an aside.
Reminds me of somebody. But anyway.